and welcome to Columbus Metropolitan Club. I'm Carol Newcomb-Maludo, a member of CMC's Board of Trustees. It's great to see everyone today on a beautiful spring day. It's supposed to be in the 50s. So I'm glad you're here instead of outside. Today's forum is Security Foggy for Cloud Computing. Is sponsored by Improving, represented here by many friends and associates. Won't you please help me thank Improving? We know our IT professionals love what cloud computing provides: large-scale data storage without direct management or hardware, easy access around the world with many different devices and portals. But many of us end users aren't fond of the idea of our information being stored out there somewhere. It seems kind of ambiguous. Perhaps the many advantages also lead to many vulnerabilities. We want to explore these issues today, so please welcome our speakers. Vice President and CEO of Corporate Information Technology at Battelle, David White. Senior Vice President of CIO Infrastructure and Operations at Nationwide, Susan Gueli. VIP CIO at American Municipal Power, Branndon Kelley. And our host, President of JJH Consulting, LLC, John Hrusovsky. John, it's all yours.
Thank you, Carol. We have about 30 minutes to go through a set of questions that I'll ask the panel, and then we'll have about 20 minutes after that to then open it up for the audience for questions. Okay? So the first question that I want to ask each of the panel members is, from an information technology perspective, can you please define the cloud from your perspective? That's a loaded question because a lot of people are like, what is that? Go ahead.
It is.
Yeah.
Whoever wants to jump in, go ahead.
I'll go first. I think I have probably the most simplistic definition of the cloud, and it basically is somebody else's stuff. From an IT perspective, we have servers, infrastructure, equipment that we would run our applications on, our systems, our accounting systems, and so forth. The cloud is basically that is being run by somebody else. It's owned by somebody else, and somebody else is doing what we traditionally would do within our enterprise. So it's somebody else doing what we traditionally would do ourselves.
Very good. Susan?
Awesome. I'll just add to that a little bit. You think about, even from a personal perspective, along with the business perspective of the cloud, we all buy home PCs. And on those home PCs, we're asked, how much storage do you want? How much compute power do you want? What kind of applications do you need? And we get to ask the question with the cloud, how much do I want? How much storage do I want on my home PC versus how much can I use for my photos and my data in the cloud? It gives me the opportunity to have less resources at home and use even more resources because I couple with what I have at home and in the cloud. From a business perspective, we think about storage, compute, and applications, and you can have any tier of those resources provided for you in your enterprise data centers or in somebody else's data center that's managing and offering that service to you.
Great. Brandon, would you like to add?
Yeah, agreed. Here's the way I look at it, and it's pretty simplistic, and it's not something I created. It actually was written in a book a while ago. Think about cloud computing much like the electricity business, the business that I'm in. 125 years ago, during the Industrial Revolution, when we were first starting to have electricity in manufacturing facilities, people built their own power plant and they set it next to their facility because that was the only way to operate, right? I got to know it's going to be delivered. I got to control it. And so if you look at kind of from like the late 1800s through 1920 or so 30 years, we really started going to what we're all familiar with now is you don't even care You just go over and you press a light switch and it comes on. And this month you're going to put up Christmas lights, so you're going to need a lot more, and you're not going to necessarily worry and stress about it. So if you think about compute, 30, 40 years, we were building it ourselves. We've done that. There's this evolution, and we're now to this point in time where we're really looking at that. There's all the things that were mentioned here as the commodity. So let's start focusing on value stuff and push the commodity piece of just the application, uptime, availability, the ability to expand, and in most cases, ideal cases, the ability to shrink, the elasticity. So that's the way I think about it. And when we're explaining it to, our board or our CEO, we talk about it like that. And then we eventually get into the security pieces. But the base definition, that's the kind of way I like to.
I love the analogy to power, because in the cloud you pay for only what you use. And like you said, you can turn it on or you can turn it off. And when you turn it off, you don't pay for it, which is really attractive, right?
Mm-hmm. Very good. So all three of you, tied some of the benefits of the cloud in your definition. So we're gonna spend plenty of time talking about some of the challenges and some of the caveats to it. But before we do that, take us into some other from either a professional or personal or both perspective of really being able to leverage that technology cloud.
Awesome. You want me to get started?
Sure.
Okay, so a couple of things that we love about the cloud at Nationwide and as a part of our cloud strategy is it's much faster. When you can use the resources in the cloud than when you're building it yourself. So we're going for speed. The pace of business today is so much faster than what it was just 2 or 3 years ago. So we're looking at any technology today that can help us move at the pace of business. And cloud is one of those technologies. We love the efficiency that it brings because you can turn resources on and you can turn them off. And we really believe that it brings down the barriers when you want to drive experimentation and innovation, because it is a very low-cost entry point. You don't have to have massive infrastructure to be able to invest in before you can start experimenting and innovating. So we love that speed to innovation as well and the low cost of entry.
Very good. Mm-hmm. David or Branndon?
Two things. If personally on cloud, I think about this. I like to fancy myself as an amateur photographer. So, and it really correlated with my son's birth and me being sort of frugal and thinking how much money we would spend for a long period of time on photography and me having kind of a keen interest. So I had a collection of probably 6 or 7 years worth of photography. I'm talking extensive. And like any good IT person, I don't practice what I preach. And so I lost all that, or which I thought I lost all that. I had it, I don't want to get too technical. And that was kind of a turn on for me to realize that, and what we think about in business is like, what do we want to be good at? What are we good at? And running this infrastructure stuff isn't what we're good at. The other example I'll give real quick is, we started so I work for electric utility. We're nonprofit. We service only cities, townships, municipals, villages, and boroughs that own and operate their own electric system. And so many of those are very small, and they don't necessarily have staff to do innovative things like smart city or smart grid or advanced meter infrastructure. So we developed a program. We manage it on behalf. We deploy it. It's part of some of my responsibilities. And one of the challenges was the cost. So like the historic model would be dumping out millions and millions of dollars on storage and compute and all this stuff. And then it's build it, and if they come, they use it. If they don't, you still have that sunk cost. And so we really utilized a cloud model. We like to call it a utility model because of the business we're in, where we grow each meter that comes on. So we can grow compute, storage. Every time we add another meter to the system, we literally can grow. And then we can cost that right back out to the member, and they're only paying for exactly what they need. And we don't have this technical debt or this whole, it's like we didn't use that for 5 years, so it's got to be thrown away. That's two examples I would use, John.
Great, thank you. David?
I would echo the comments about speed, and the speed of implementation in the cloud is the direct result of business process. So if you work in any organization of any size, you'll know that if you have to buy a number of racks of computers and storage and go through your procurement process, the minimum time frame is probably about 6 months by the time you competitively bid it, get your responses back, negotiate the contract, receive the goods, install the goods, tune the goods, and then you'll have something up and running. I can spin up an environment in the cloud in about an hour, right? So there's a huge speed advantage there, but you have to be careful because depending on how you're using the cloud, it's not necessarily less expensive than what you're doing on premise. What the cloud folks have been able to do, and you have to thank Amazon for this once again, is they figured out how to charge you down to the minute. So when you spin up a resource in that environment, they will have a bill for you for every resource that you consume all the way down to the minute. It's like the phone companies. They figured out how to do it, and they will send you a bill for what you're consuming. So you need to really understand what you're spinning up and how you're consuming it, and do, like I say, turn the lights off when you're not home, right? Spin down the resources so that you're not consuming what you're not using.
So David, you were starting to take us a little bit into some of the challenges or some of the realities, and we're gonna build off of that. Before we do, though, I want to mention a couple quick examples from my perspective. When I'm a small business owner, and so everything we do is in the cloud, all our apps that we use, and a lot of small businesses. Actually, before the session started, I was talking to some of my colleagues out there and talking about that for small and medium-sized businesses. If you're not looking at the cloud for your apps, or infrastructure, then you should be. And secondly, I'll tell you another a quick story. And we're going to get into security a little bit, but since it was mentioned here, one of my clients, this was about 4 or 5 years ago, was Carnegie Mellon University. And if you're at all familiar with Carnegie Mellon University when it relates to technology and computing, they are really known as one of the high-end computing schools and environments in the world. And because of that, they get hacked. They don't get hacked. They get attempted to be hacked on approximately about 1 million times a week on average from all over the world. Because if you can hack into Carnegie Mellon, then you've got, you're like it in that space, I guess. And so we were implementing a new HR payroll system. And so with HR payroll system is very, very confidential information. And they were convinced, and we were using a cloud vendor to do that, and they were absolutely convinced that their security platform and strategy at Carnegie Mellon was better than this vendor. So they took them through every kind of test you could possibly go through. And at the end of the day, that cloud vendor actually had a better security profile than Carnegie Mellon. And it's not because they're better, it's because they have to invest that money in that because it's so important to their day-to-day perspective. So we'll get into security, but I do think that that's one of the areas where the cloud community is put a tremendous emphasis on, because one breach for a cloud vendor could cause them to go under. Okay, so let's go into some of the potential risks or realities or even challenges. So whoever wants to jump in, go ahead first.
Well, I can just tell you, so our, and I think your question you're going to ask in a bit, our primary core financial system is on premise, but we have a lot of these little things that kind of scatter around that, HR payroll being one of those that's in the cloud. And another one being a reporting application, and I'll leave the vendor's name off the table. And so one of the biggest risks you have is this application is core to our business. It's how we produce our financial reports every month. It's how me, as running a business unit, gets my information to be able to make decisions. If accounts payable forgets to pay the bill, and they do that for a few months, it gets turned off. And that's a risk. Whereas, in theory, if it's in your data center, you can't do it. So you just have to, I always tell, when we're going through these things, the risk, there's still a lot of risk, right? The risk to run it is you're probably not good. You're not the best at running infrastructure. I mean, that's not what AMP is. We're not an IT infrastructure company. So we have to kind of move that to a contractual thing, right? So we have to make sure that we have the right information in the contract, our liability is moved appropriately, and then that we have the processes in place to make sure that we're doing the things on our end. One, paying the bill to make sure that the application stays up. Because, today, if a piece of the financial system that's on premise, something happens to it, I can start a firestorm to get people to react. If it's in the cloud, they have, 2 million other customers that they're dealing with, and my problems aren't their biggest problems. So kind of understanding that and making sure you put the wrapper around it to make sure you're taking care of your obligations. So that you still have obligations, paying bills and making sure you're doing the things appropriately.
So there's a lot associated with cloud, and I'll go back to your original question so that we can kind of set the table. When we talk about cloud, we in IT have made it more complex than it probably needs to be, but there's lots of different versions of cloud.
It's called job security.
Yeah.
Right?
So, and we like to use acronyms for everything. So there's SaaS, which is software as a service, which is an application that only runs from the cloud. The HR system that John's referring to is something that only lives in the cloud. You cannot run that in your environment. There's PaaS, which is platform as a service. There's IaaS, which is your infrastructure as a service, so you can actually run your core compute there, and that's where kind of Amazon and Google and Microsoft want to play in that space. So all of these different things, what is the right environment for you? When I apply that to Battelle and the lens that I have, the first thing I have to ask is the question of security. We are primarily a government contractor, and we have government contract compliance issues that are flowed down to us that says that you must protect the data in a certain manner. I cannot go to the basic commercial cloud and do business because it's not safe enough, it's not protected enough. The federal government wants me to have a higher level of security. Ironically, it's going to cost me more money to get that higher level of security within those clouds. So while it's great to work in those environments, those cloud environments, I have to look at everything associated with what we're doing. We're still able to do it, but I talk a different language when we talk cloud. I want to know if you're FedRAMP compliant, or do you have an ISO 27001 certification? And a lot of times people, if you can't answer those questions, I don't need to go any further with our conversation because that's a baseline requirement for me. Probably not the same for what you guys are doing at Nationwide, but depending on what you're doing, you have to look at what are the table stakes to even get started within this environment. Yeah.
I have said, I think it is a bit different. I have often said context matters. So you look at everybody in this room today, your starting point is different, right? Everybody's is different. It's not the same. I look at Nationwide starting point. Our context is we are nearly a 100-year-old company with a significant portfolio of applications that have been built over the last 60 years. I think there's still code running with mining in it. When I started, when I was a developer, I won't tell you how long ago. But the reality is we have a whole portfolio of applications that were built when the cloud wasn't even a thing. So they're not ready and prepared to move to the cloud. So you really have to think about where you want to invest dollars to move and ready applications for the cloud. And we've done that very deliberately. We have said, our applications that are differentiating for our company, the ones that engage our members, the ones that engage our partners, the ones that change frequently, that could take full advantage of the fact that cloud gives us speed and agility, those are the ones we care very much about rewriting, cloud-enabled to take all the advantages of the cloud. We have non-differentiated capabilities, like capabilities that Branndon and John talked about, HR. It's not a differentiated capability for our business. That goes totally SaaS, or software as a service. We don't care to manage that, and we don't believe it needs to be a differentiated service for our business. So I would say those challenges that you will face in moving to the cloud are definitely highly dependent on what your context is, how big your business is, what your app portfolio is, how you're thinking about it from a personal perspective. And I love the comment earlier around, really knowing what you're consuming, because when cloud costs more is when you start to consume and you don't have visibility to that consumption, and you let it run when you're done using it and you're not using it anymore but still paying for it. Really easy to see when the lights are left on, right? And we remember our parents saying, why can't you turn the lights off when you leave the room? Cloud is the same thing. We've got to bring visibility through reporting on what's resources are out there and which ones are actually being utilized, because you can turn the ones off that aren't actually being utilized.
Great. So let's take the same question, and now I'd like for you guys to change your lens a little bit and look at it from a personal perspective.
Sure.
Because I think as folks in the audience who are interested, as much professional as personal as well. So talk about it from, when I say personal, it could be your laptop you use at work, or what you do at home, or even what your children do when it comes to utilizing the cloud. So go ahead, whoever wants to jump in.
So I'll start. I am a early adopter in a lot of things. I will try to have the most up-to-date things within my personal life. Ironically, I've sworn off social media for Lent, so I haven't.
That's not a bad thing to give up to.
Yeah. I was telling Branndon I hadn't kept up with him because I haven't seen him on Facebook for a few weeks. Yeah, but anyhow. It's interesting because I am that guy that is always kind of on top of everything. And I have a daughter that's a junior in high school, and she blows me away. Right? I can't keep up with her. I told this story before, but I'll tell it again. So when she was in 8th grade, she's at the Metro school. And we were getting notices from the high school principal saying that they were going to implement a monitoring software for the internet. So the kids' internet traffic was going to be monitored. So I reached out to my daughter and said, hey, they're going to start monitoring what you're doing on the internet. You need to be careful. And she just kind of blew me off. And I was just kind of like, hold on, I'm the IT guy here. You can't just blow me off. And so I went back to her and told her again, they're going to start, you need to be careful. You need to watch what you're doing. And she blew me off again. And I'm starting to get pissed off now, so. You're
not only the IT guy, you're dad, right? Like, what's going on here?
So I kept stressing the point, and she said, Dad, why are you talking to me? What's going on? I said, well, they're going to start monitoring your traffic. She says, Dad, I've been running a VPN for the last 6 months. They can't see anything I'm doing.
And you're like, what's VPN?
And she's in 8th grade, and I was like, oh my God, I'm in trouble. Yeah. So, the kids coming up, already understand how to protect their identity and their traffic and what's going on. She was plugged into a VPN long before I was. She knew exactly what to do. And this was not something that they taught her in school. This was from her peers saying, hey, you need to do this if you're going to be in these places.
Yeah, very good.
Awesome. I think, from a personal perspective, the things we worry about utilizing the cloud are the same things we worry about in business. So you think about storing all of your personal photos. Those are personal, right? Mm-hmm. All of your personal contacts. That's personal to me. You worry about who is going to have access and how do you restrict access. And it's something that we all have to manage and configure, right? And it's like, well, am I going to know exactly how to manage and configure? Are people going to be able to get access to those personal things? It was a hard hard hurdle for me to get over personally, to start storing personal information in the cloud until you educate yourself, until you understand how to restrict that access and protect your information. And then it becomes a great mechanism for backing up, right, your photos so you don't lose them. And it becomes second nature for us all, I think, to use. Now we don't know how in the world we would be able to manage the storage of all of the photos that we keep or the information that we have personally. I don't know how I would by trying to manage that on home devices. It would be impossible.
Yeah. Branndon?
You know, it's really the idea that storage is so cheap, it's readily available, it's cloud, you know. My iPhone will say, hey, you need more storage, you just press one button, $2 more, you got it. It's really created, and in Facebook and everywhere else, it's really created this world where we're just like saving like everything forever. And then you just watch the news, and so everybody's got everything, and whether it's appropriate or inappropriate, saved on their device, it's mimicked locally to the cloud, and then you see on the news about once a week somebody's device gets hacked, and and they post the information they found there. So I mean, I think there's one level of this. It's just a personal responsibility. It's like, what are you saving this stuff for? What are you creating it for? And two, to the point made, it's like you just have to make sure that you're aware of where it's at, and you're putting those parameters around. There's all kinds of things that you can set to make sure that like other people don't have access, or this piece doesn't go to the cloud. I think probably one of the lessons that maybe most recently that I think just for a consumer, just an average home user or whatever, is that, and it's something that we've been talking about as we move more and more critical type applications to the cloud, or consider it, is a multi-cloud approach, right? So like, you're going to put stuff in Amazon, and Amazon's got data centers over the world, and they're awesome, but what happens if you stop getting along with Amazon? What happens if Amazon takes some kind of global outage? And so now why don't we do a strategy between like balancing that load between Amazon and Microsoft? Back to, at home, just like 2 weeks ago or last week, not that there's probably anybody in the room left, but it's like something like 13 million songs. Like the sole place that they were backed up was MySpace, and they lost those, and they're gone. So if you were utilizing that as your primary storage for your music you created, because if you know anything about MySpace, that's what originally was created for musicians. It's gone now. And so I think about, I immediately started thinking about my strategy of how I'm backing this stuff up, and thinking this stuff is very, very important to me. And what if Dropbox is who I use for these photos, is like, what if that goes away, or they have some outage, or what could happen? And so I think we have to be aware of what it is we're storing, and make sure that we're not keeping stuff that's just not necessary. Because it's so cheap and it's so available, just good hygiene. I remember years ago, we would 20 years ago when I got in IT and the file server would get filled up, we'd send a global email out that says, hey, listen, we're about out of space, and that's going to mean we're going to spend a lot of money, so go get rid of some stuff. You can't do that now because of legal hold and all kinds of stuff. And the answer is, well, it's just a few dollars, so go do it. That's created this whole just mounds and mounds of information. So talk to my son all the time, because he's into making YouTube videos and stuff. It's like, you're creating all this content. I'm like, delete this stuff, clean this stuff up, get rid of this stuff, not just leave it there because it's available. I think about, and I won't name the person because people could figure it out, but a person I used to work for, he was so anti-cloud. The world, he was very paranoid. He's retired now, but he would back his computer up to all these USB thumb drives and whatnot, and then they'd be scattered everywhere. And then I remember he wanted to get rid of some stuff. He gave me a whole box. He's like, here, next time the recycler comes and give these to him. And I'd like plug one in. It was like his taxes and his financial information and it was like, you don't want it in the cloud, but you're handing this to me and trusting me, and I'm going to hand it to some other guy, I don't even know who he is, and trusting them. So personal responsibility, I think, would be, we relied too much on systems and people to just kind of make us do the right thing, and we really need to do the right thing ourselves.
Yeah.
Okay, we've got about 3 minutes before we're going to open up for questions. So I want to get to one question, and maybe each could take approximately a minute. But I want you to talk about, is it possible to have your data safe in the cloud? And what are those things? Because that's part of the reason why we wanted to have this conversation, right? Is to talk about, is that possible? What is your experiences as it relates to, and what are some of the things maybe you can think of, either personally or professionally, to make to reduce the risk of failure around that?
Sure. Yes, it is possible to have your data safe in the cloud. You cannot take the out-of-the-box solution. You have to harden it, and you have to do some additional things to ensure that it is safe. If you have the ability to manage, first you want to make sure that it's all encrypted, both in transit and at rest. Second of all, if you can manage your own encryption keys, and some vendors will allow you to do that. That's another key thing. So in you managing your encryption keys, the cloud provider doesn't have the ability to unencrypt the data. Now, when you're running with encryption, if they have the keys, then they actually have access to unencrypted data. So it is protected, but they still have access to it. If you can get a higher level of security within the environment, so things like making sure your data is stored in a data center that's located in the continental U.S. and not spread all across the world. One of the things that we require is only U.S. persons operating in the data center. That's another thing that you can ask. It's all contractual, but these are things you can do to help ensure your data is safe within your cloud environment.
I completely agree. Yes, your data can be secure in the cloud. And I would say, one of the beauties of the cloud is it's highly configurable. And one of the challenges of the cloud is it's highly configurable. You have probably all read the newspapers of Amazon's S3 storage, data accessible by folks who shouldn't have access to it, mainly because it was so configurable that folks didn't understand they were allowing access to everyone. They didn't understand what safeguards they themselves had to put in place. So it is highly configurable. You have to understand how you're configuring it. I will tell you that all cloud providers have made it harder and harder to configure inappropriately. So they're tightening down how configurable it is from a security perspective. And, what we have done at Nationwide, which has been very successful for us thus far, is we put guardrails up. So while there is a portfolio of configurations, we have set some holistically for any of our nationwide presence within the public cloud. And when app teams or other IT professionals bump up against those guardrails, they talk to us about it. And we make a very deliberate decision. Do we have to replace the guardrail for this particular instance, and does it make sense? So there are ways, absolutely, that you can configure a highly secure environment, but it does take action on all of our part, this personal accountability and responsibility, whether you're providing access configuration to your personal cloud storage or to your business's cloud storage.
I would just say that the cloud can be just as safe as on-premise, and because I don't think anything's completely safe, because security is a defensive mechanism, right? You're on the defense. The other thing I would say is that these cloud providers probably consistently are operationally more safe because it's their business. I mean, they die if there's even the slightest breach, and so the short answer is it's as safe and likely more safe over time. I mean, you could find instances where someone could argue that it's not, but more than likely.
I would say, kind of in summary to that point, it really is a lot of cases when there are breaches, or issues, it's user error.
Yeah, it's not a breach.
Yeah, right.
Typically it's not a breach.
Yeah.
We haven't seen that. So,
yeah, that's right. I meant to say when it's an issue, it ends up being someone internally doing something that's not appropriate, or maybe didn't even know what they were doing.
We struggle with that, right? We all businesses struggle with managing access and managing access appropriately. Absolutely. It's often been a challenge from a security perspective.
Yeah. Okay, we are going to move to audience questions in just a minute or two. So there's a microphone over here that you'll step up to back on our left-hand side. And don't be shy with your questions. But I do want to leave kind of one final thought with all of you before we jump into the questions, that I was actually 4 of my 6 clients right now are actually going to the cloud for some of their strategic applications. And so this individual yesterday was saying to me, oh, yeah, we're the cloud's the future for us. And as you just heard, the cloud really isn't the future. I mean, it is, of course, the future, but it's already here today and has been here today. And I think that's the real crux of this, right? And we can embrace it, right? We can embrace and take advantage of the capabilities that you can achieve through cloud computing, and know that there are risks, and you have to address those risks as you go. But it is worth it for sure, as you can tell. And I really like Branndon's analogy earlier to that. In a lot of ways, we are moving from that technology perspective where electricity was, 100 years ago. Okay, so I have to also mention that it's CMC's tradition to take audience questions. We're going to do that. You please state your name and ask your question. Please avoid editorial comments in your question, and remember, questions end with a question mark. So let's get started. First question, please. So whoever wants to jump up there. And what I will do is I will repeat your question or the essence of it, and then we'll go from there.
Very informative. Thank you. Mark Reel. What is your opinion of, would there be a successor to WikiLeaks, or has that type of leakage been prevented?
So just to repeat the questions, so it's Mark Reel, and his question is related to WikiLeaks, right? And is that a possibility as we progress? So whoever wants to jump in.
I don't think it's ever preventable because there's a human element to it, right? I mean, we have all kinds of systems in place that, whether it's on the cloud or it's on premise, that if you go into somewhere and you start looking at intellectual property or something, you get a bunch of alerts, and, because if you have permission. But I mean, short of taking off running and tackling the guy, by the time you get the alert, by the time you react, that information can be shared. I just think we have to it's back to a people thing. You got to do more due diligence on your people, background checks. That needs to be not a snapshot. It's not like, well, when he got hired, we did a background check, he was good. It's over a period of time. I mean, if you hold any kind of clearance, I know you have to go, every year it's a process, or every 2 years, whatever, I can't remember. But if you're in a business with highly confidential data and things that, if other people, whether it's intellectual property or secrets, you just have to, there's still the human element. The technology is not going to solve all those problems short of not making it available.
Yeah, and we have said, we see every day advancements in technology that make it more and more powerful, and so many of us want to do good with that great new capability, but there are people out there that want to do bad. Right, and you're always going to be battling those, and this is why our information security practices and other security practices need to continue to be robust and invested in, because every new technology that can be used for good, somebody's trying to find a way to use it for evil.
Yeah, I think that WikiLeaks is always going to be out there, and the option for that type of functionality. What folks are trying to figure out, or what they seem to have figured out, is how to weaponize data, right? How do you use it in a bad way? And that's always going to be something that we're going to have to deal with for forever.
Great question, though. Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Mark. Carol?
Yes, I'm Carol Nucamaludo, and I thank you very much, panel, for being here today. I learned quite a bit. I'm almost feeling comfortable about the safety of the cloud, but I do have a question. Does cloud vendors outsource to other vendors? And how do you know really who has your data, or who's managing it, or where? And does it really matter to you?
So just to repeat the question, so do cloud vendors outsource to other cloud vendors? Do you, in a lot of cases, know where your data is, and do you care? There you go.
Like everything in IT, the answer is it depends. The first part of your question, do cloud vendors use cloud services? And the answer is absolutely yes. Why wouldn't they, right? So they're going through the same iterations that we are as companies and asking themselves the same questions. Why do we need to build our own infrastructure? Why can't we leverage others? One of the storage products that we use in Battelle is a product called Box.com. We've been using it for about 5 years. About 3 years ago, they came to the conclusion that storage was a commodity. We needed to be out of the business, and so they're using Microsoft's Azure platform or AWS to store their data. So that cloud is using another cloud for storage. However, I can designate where I want my data, so I do know where my data is. So even if they are using other clouds, you still can assert some level of control over your data.
And as you mentioned earlier, you do that through the contract, right? So most of us care where our data is and where it's being served from, and we align those desires right in the contract with the providers. It's a great question.
Branndon, anything?
No, I disagree. I mean, same things. It's important. You know, personally, I don't know that's important. I don't know you really would want to pay for it, but in the business, our contracts, U.S.-based data centers, even to a certain extent, these laws, these state laws will govern any kind. And it's all contract. You know, it goes, so you got to have really smart, geared-in attorneys that understand technology. It's a new kind of contract that you have to make sure that you're aware of. And, you know, if you just get that generic Microsoft Office 365 contract that they give you, they're going to limit your liability to the last 12 months of money you spent. So, like, if you only have 10 licenses, for example, and they're $5 a piece, that's $50 a month, $600 a year, then you lose all your stuff, and it had all your clients, you know, your CPA, and had all your clients, you know, if Microsoft takes a breach and the data makes available, their liability is limited to $600. And it's like, what's that going to do? That's not even going to pay for an hour of an attorney. So you just have to make sure that you're just, you know, a lot of times we just sign these things real quick. I learned that the hard way in a Cub Scout thing. But you got to look at these. You got to look at these contracts.
Yeah, real quick before we get to the next question, one of my clients is a Canadian university. And they were deep into their negotiations with their cloud vendor for their HR, payroll, finance, and student information. And they didn't realize that the cloud vendor had planned on having their data outside of Canada. And that was like they couldn't have it. And so they had to go through a whole series of setting up actually infrastructure within Canada to be able to support this customer, which is very, very unusual for a cloud vendor to do that. But that was what they ended up having to do. Now they're planning on getting more customers up in Canada, but that was just one of the rules they had to work with. So it does take on those points, Carol, where in some cases it may not matter, but in a lot of cases it does, and there's contractual aspects around it as well. Okay, next question.
Hey, Josh Harrison with Improving. For each of your organizations, as you move to the cloud, what does the ideal future state look like in terms of on-premise versus cloud? Is it 100% cloud, 90%? And then what does the timeline look like to get there?
So just to repeat, Josh, you took my question. Doggone, that's great. No, so Josh's question is, you know, from your company's perspective, what is that sweet spot of a combination of on-premise and cloud?
So we have, I can get us started. We have a cloud-first strategy at Nationwide. We believe that this strategy is best anchored in, as David mentioned earlier, you know, software as a service first for non-differentiated capabilities, and we're moving in that direction very quickly. Platforms as a service where they're available, and then if not platform, then infrastructure as a service. We really look at the context of the value that we are trying to drive. For some of our applications, we are very focused on speed and agility. For other applications, we are very focused on efficiency, and we have strategies for how to drive out that efficiency. Maybe for an application, we have 4 test environments because we are running testing in parallel, but they're only used part of the time. We know now for that application, we can spin up those environments and pay for them only when they're used and spin them down, and that's a key driver of efficiency for us. So we are looking very keenly at what value we're trying to drive with each move to the cloud, but based on the evaluation of our app portfolio, the number of applications that will actually retire because of transformation that's going on, we expect over the next 36 months to have about 75 to 80% of our app portfolio in the public cloud.
I don't know that I can answer specifically. I don't know that we will ever be 100% in the cloud. Matter of fact, we probably never will be, and that's just the nature of kind of who we are and what we do with some of our systems. We're making the migration to the cloud now, starting with the SaaS applications, looking at, we've already moved our HR, we're looking at our financial system next. So that'll happen over a number of years. When it comes to basic compute and my data center and whether or not I'm going to maintain that, I'm actually looking at it from the perspective of when do I need to make the next investment. So I have a data center with equipment in it that is probably good for another 10 to 15 years. I don't have to buy any more power. I don't have to buy any more crack units. When I need to make a major investment, I'll probably make the decision that it's time to get out of the data center business and move that to either a hosted environment or to the cloud.
Yeah, so I joined AMP in 2009, and we were transforming as an organization, growing significantly. I mean, since 2009, revenues doubled. And so I had one of the things I was challenged with was, get this stuff together. So we developed in 2009 like a kind of a five-tier or pillar strategy, and one of those was we think cloud first. And so we had stuff like Lotus Notes, and I know some people still have Lotus Notes, and I won't argue about it, but ours was archaic in the sense that it was like 2004 release. And, so we were an early adopter of Office 365. Matter of fact, it was called Microsoft Business Productivity Online Suite at the time. And that was like, I'd go to utility conferences and I was talking in another language and I was a nut job. But, and I remember even my IT staff at the time, they'd be like, oh, we can't do that. What happens if it goes down? I go, the same thing that happens when Lotus Notes goes down 3 times every week. We'll just deal with it and we'll survive. So, we came out of 2009, 10, 11, 12, if you will, and we really focused on what I'll call low-hanging fruit, these commodity-type applications that maybe we were a little ahead of most of our peers in the business, and then we kind of took a step back because we built, $6 billion in new power plants, and so we were focused on doing that. And now we did just make a data center move, and we got out of the data center business in 2009. But really what's going to continue, and why some applications today still exist on-premise, even though they are cloud-ready, and we should probably put them in the cloud, is because we have a certain level of compliance and regulatory systems that have to be in our data center. So you're already got this spend for that core infrastructure, and the incremental spend to continue to operate that on-premise, it gets this, like, cloud's not always cheaper. Okay, and so you have to look at it holistically like that. And so I would say, and we see the federal government in the future maybe being a little bit more lax. I mean, what agency was it? Just bought like another gazillion dollars worth of Amazon last week. When the NERC and the FERC, who are regulatory authorities, kind of start allowing some of our controls and our SCADA systems to move to those applications, we'll be less reliant on that data center, and that will allow some more of these business applications that could go to the cloud today to move as well. But in the next couple years, we'll probably move potentially our financial system to either infrastructure as a service or platform as a service. We will, there's one or two others that I'll just leave quiet because I've got a lot of vendors in the room that will call me afterwards to get on those projects. But
Okay, so I'm going to summarize, and we'll take, I think, one more question to Josh, to your question. What you heard from all three individuals is the term cloud first. And that term, I mean, I don't think it existed maybe 5 years ago. I mean, it did maybe from an infrastructure perspective, but not from an apps perspective. And so every organization, all my clients I work with are either going to the cloud for all their applications or most of their applications, or are assessing whether they should do it. And so that cloud first, I think, is the key point there, that if you're an organization, small business, large business, and you're not thinking about the cloud first as an option, that's probably, you need to think about your strategy, because that is really where the world's going. That's where the vendors are going. I'll give you a quick example. Ohio State, just right up the street here, right? They are moving all of their student, HR, payroll, and finance applications. So their core applications are moving them all to the cloud. And that's hard to imagine for an organization that has a product called PeopleSoft that they've customized an incredible amount. For them to do that is significant. So when you see organizations like that moving core apps, that's why cloud first is got to be the strategy. Okay, go ahead.
Jane Scott with Metropolitan Club. So our server in-house died a few years ago, so of course our IT provider said, oh, you've got to move to the cloud, and we said, okay, well, whatever that means, and we did it, and so we went with Microsoft 365 like everybody else, right? I'm curious, it added so many steps for us internally as a small company, because you create a document, you store it in the cloud, you want to work with the document, you got to get it down off the cloud and put it back on your desktop. Why on earth didn't they create at least their basic programs to run decently on the cloud? I mean, Excel is a pain. Word doesn't work at all. And I just never, I mean, I know it's meant for storage, but for some of the very, very basic stuff, it's just awkward. It's cumbersome.
Okay, so Jane, I'm going to read this thing to you. Remember, questions end with the question mark.
Why did they do that? Why did Microsoft create such an awkward program?
I'll never get invited back now after I just said that. I'm just joking. No.
Good point.
So in summary, I think what it's a very good question. It really is. And the question is that when vendors retrofit apps, right, from on-premise to the cloud, why can't they get it right? That's what you're asking.
Well, so I spent some time, and prior to my time in AMP, helping clients like yourself do stuff like this, and there's people in this room that could probably solve your problem pretty quickly. Every pain point you're talking about, it's just the person that's providing you that service it's not configured properly, or they're not showing it, or no offense, you didn't go to enough training, whatever it might be.
Oh, it's user error for sure.
But it core functions. You know, I live in that world. I utilize a lot of what you say. So I would tell you to hire somebody different or get a second opinion. But seriously, these applications, the Microsoft Office 365 application you speak of, and particularly, is perfect. Here's an example I'll tell you. My son goes to Westerville schools. They're given a Chromebook. They use Google Apps, homework, all this stuff. I sit back and think about it. What a brilliant business decision that Google made to hand us. My son is going to leave high school, and all he's ever going to know, he doesn't even use Microsoft Word. He uses all he ever is going to know is Google. And just think of how many other places they're pumping that into the schools. So your problem, go to office365.com and go to partners and type in your zip code, and there's more than enough.
Configuration, not a product challenge. Yeah.
Okay.
I agree.
David?
Good.
So I think you've hit on what I believe is the biggest issue with cloud, and it's not about the technology, it's about culture, right? Are you ready? Are you ready to make the change? Because not only are you signing up to use the product in the way that they're going to deliver to you, they're going to change it about 3 or 4 times a year, and you don't have any say in that. So if you're ready to give up control, let's go.
Does it look like we're ready to give up control?
Well, as soon as you said, yes, you will use Office 365, you gave up control.
Yeah, we have to.
And that's the thing, because now you're in a community with everybody else, and you're all moved together. It's that whole saying, a rising tide raises those ships. That's the way it's supposed to work, but sometimes you'll hear some grumbling in some of those ships.
But when it feels harder, you have to ask questions. Does it have to be this hard? What does it take to make it easier? Yeah. Because it can be very easy, right? And more seamless than the way that you
Okay.
described it. So
Good.
if it feels harder, we got to probe on it. We've got to ask what's driving that.
I would agree. Great.
Awesome question.
Okay, thank you very much. I'm going to turn it back over to Carol.
I hope you enjoyed today's forum. I learned a lot, and I'm sure Jane learned a lot, too. Let's thank our sponsor, Improving. Thank you very much. And, of course, our speakers, David White, Susan Gueli, Branndon Kelley, and John Hrusovsky. Thank you very much. I look forward to seeing you all next Wednesday.